Good afternoon, my name's Claire Haviland and I'm the English Subject Advisor at Pearson EdXL. This is a pre-recorded version of the coursework clinic for International GCSE English Literature that will be happening on Thursday the 27th of February. Okay, let me just get the PowerPoint up to share. Sorry, it's taking a minute. Okay, there we go. So let's get started. So we'll be covering, basically the aim of the session is to cover everything that you need to know about coursework for International GCSE English Lit from start to finish. So I won't bother reading that. Before we go further, I just want to remind you that we do have quite a few events scheduled for the coming months. So do have a browse there to see what is coming up. And also, very importantly, I've just started a new Facebook group for International GCSE English teachers. So please do join using the link. This will give you the opportunity to get all your updates directly in one place from me, but more importantly, perhaps to be able to network with other teachers who are offering the same qualifications as you, and to be able to reach out if you want help with anything in particular. Okie dokes. So just starting off with the basics, and forgive me if you're very familiar with these and there are other sort of details that you want. I just want to cover everything in one place. So the main things that you need to know about the coursework are in the specification from page 16. As you should know, the coursework is an alternative to sitting paper 2. So all the students sit paper 1 and some of them sit paper 2, or if they prefer, they sit the coursework. And either paper 2 or the coursework are worth 40% of marks on this qualification. So for the coursework, which is what we're talking about today, there are 2 assignments, each worth 30 marks. You have the modern drama, which is assessed for AO1 and AO2, and then you have the literary heritage texts, which is assessed for AOs 1, 2, and 4. So on the literary heritage, you've got the context in addition to the language, form, and structure, and the general understanding of the texts. So just as a reminder, these are the choices that students have for assignment A, modern drama, and I'm giving you there one sample title. Explore the ways in which Priestley presents women in An Inspector Calls. You must consider language, form, and structure. As you'll see there, I've highlighted the flag of the AO to remind students that the marks are evenly divided between AO1 and AO2, so they do need to be spending time on analysing language, form and structure in the coursework. And then assignment B, your choice of texts, and again, a sample title, this time with both of the AO2 and AO4 flagged. You must consider language, form and structure and refer to the context of the novel. The novel, obviously, if it's a novel, and the play, if your students have chosen or you've chosen a play. So now we come to the question of title choice and who chooses the title, and how does that all get done. So usually all the students in a class will write on the same text, but if you're in a larger school, then it's common for different classes to do different texts according to the preference of the teacher, for example. We recommend that every student has a choice of title, so they have at least a choice of 2 titles, and that is to cover the ability range in the class and also the interest that the students may have. You don't have to have your titles approved by us, but I am going to show you or direct you to different places that you can get support on formulating your titles. So we've got a document there, examples of effective titles. In the examiner reports for this component, you get feedback every series about what the examiner thinks have been successful titles and what were not so good. Common themes there are sometimes schools do submit coursework where on the top of the coursework it just says Pride and Prejudice or something like that, and there's no actual focus for the work, or the examiner can't identify what the focus of the essay was intended to be. And then every year we offer at least once coursework marking training. So that is a place for you to get help with essay titles. The exemplar coursework, exemplars for coursework have also got titles. And then you could also use the title checkers that I have included in the pack for this event to check your own titles. This is kind of an idea that I borrowed from A-level. I first wrote these for A-level, but I think you will see how it works. This is just to check for yourself, because quite often teachers send me titles and they say, are these okay? And some of the basic elements are not actually there. And so although this sounds really obvious, it's just a series of 5 questions that you ask yourself. Does the title have the full title of the text in it? So, and inspector calls, and does it have the author's full name? If a quote is being used, so some schools like to have, or teachers like to have, a quote like that introduces a theme, and then underneath a question, the actual question. That's fine. But if you are taking that approach, it needs to be clear what the link is, so that the student's not kind of half writing about the quote and half writing about the actual title. The title should have one focus only. It shouldn't be mixed. So this is all on the example of what is the significance of Gerald Croft. So this fails question 1. It doesn't have the title or the author. 2 is not relevant because there's no quote. The title does have one focus only. It's about one character, Gerald Croft. The title should flag AO2. This title fails that, so I've indicated how you could correct that. And then, is the title ready to use as it's presented? No, it isn't. It needs to be corrected. So that's just a way for you to do it yourself. Some centres, but not many, will involve students in devising the titles. If your students are involved, then they can then go on and use a blank form to check theirs. So, and then I did a similar one for assignment B, but I won't bother checking it because it's the same principle. So next thing is, in order to have a successful coursework experience, teachers and students, the best thing to do is set things up at the beginning and make sure that it's really clear. So let me bring up my next document. So I've provided all of these documents in Word so that you can just adapt them for your own purposes. So this is just an example of a document that you can give to students so that they're entirely clear what's expected of them. So the word count is very important. We do receive quite a lot of coursework which is over length. The word count is advisory, but clearly you would be changing the goalpost somewhat if you allowed students to write, let's say, double the length, because then you might choose a different title or a different focus. So we are firmly of the belief that you can students can achieve full marks with this length. If it goes up to 1,000, that's okay. If it's 2,000, that's really not okay. It's too long. So we are telling students how long it should be. The title doesn't include a title and a bibliography if you're using one. You must put the word count on your first draft. You give all the dates, when they need to read or when they need to write the coursework, when they need to hand it in, when they'll get feedback, and then when they will hand in their final draft. And then you give them a choice of questions. I've given 3 here and allowed students to formulate their own if they want to, but in many cases, teachers will be working with maybe only 2, for example. Before students get started, they absolutely must have a session, a reminder about plagiarism and the use of AI so that they understand what's required. We're going to say more about it later. It's not entirely necessary to use secondary resources, secondary materials to support this coursework. It's mainly about students reading and understanding the text and developing their own position, their own ideas about it, and obviously the language and structure and the context as well. But nevertheless, some students will use secondary materials, and if they do, those have to be listed in a bibliography, and more about that, again, how to do it exactly later. And the other thing is also AI, which I'll also tackle later, but both you and your students are going to be signing an AI declaration. Students should not be using AI for this coursework because what would they be using it for? They shouldn't be using it to formulate the actual way that the text is written, and they don't need to have secondary resources, secondary materials, so they don't need AI in order to help find them. At this level, it's appropriate if teachers want to have secondary material involved that they provide that to the students rather than sending them off to look for it where they may well come across secondary material that's not suitable. So it's very important at the beginning that that is clear. And then I just go on to say here a few more things about ways of working. It sounds really obvious. I haven't been in the classroom now for a while, but I imagine that it's still the case that students have last-minute disasters where they lose the work that they've been doing, or they can't print it, or whatever. So I go on there to have a list of different pieces of advice. So setting up the coursework, that's a key part of success. And then here is a bit more detail. Sorry, it's a very dense slide, which you will no doubt read on your own if you need to. But this just sort of summarizes what I was just saying. AO1 is maintain a critical style and present an informed personal engagement. And the principal moderator has commented that it's always more desirable to read the candidate's own critical opinion rather than have them refer to critical sources. The use of AI tools is strictly forbidden, and the new cover sheet asks centres to say that they've checked candidates' work for evidence of this. If they are using any secondary material, they can use a simple referencing approach like this. So if they've used a source by Smith, they would do a line reference in the body of the text, and then they would give the full references for Smith in the bibliography. Okay. And now just a bit more about AI, because I know it is kind of a concern. So in general, I do get quite a few questions about this. How do people do coursework nowadays? Well, coursework is normally done in the following way. Teachers teach the text in the same way as they would for the exam, like for paper 2, like say Macbeth, they teach the play, all of the plays, whole texts. A difference for coursework might be that they have more of a focus in on what they know is going to be the coursework title. So they teach it and then they set up the coursework, and then usually students go off and they complete the coursework outside the classroom in their own time. Usually, almost all coursework is word processed, so students will work on that at home. They can use the spell and grammar checkers that are in Word, but they can't use tools like Grammarly to improve their work. And now, how do we check what's going on in this? So we do advise that during the writing of the first draft, you have a few check-ins in class so that the teacher can get an impression of where students are at with the project. So, you know, how much have they written? What does it look like? Checking the length before final submission is really important in case a student says, oh, I'm nowhere near finished, but I've already written 1,000 words. What should I do? So it's easier to correct length issues earlier rather than at the end. And some schools, because of their concerns about AI, do have students write the coursework in class now. So not all of it, but they might give some class time. And they may also use a platform that allows them to see all the edits in the work. So they could see, for example, if a student suddenly inserted a big paragraph that looked like it had been come from AI production, for example, or from a book source, and that was not their own work and which hadn't been acknowledged. I'll just mention here, some teachers have asked me, what's the future of coursework? Is it likely to be removed because of AI concerns? And I can just reassure you that as things stand, there aren't any plans to remove coursework from any English qualifications, international GCSEs or A-levels. And now just a couple of, before we get on to some more practical, admin-y things, just a couple of resources that I wanted to mention. So one is in the pack. Let me just bring that up. So this is just something, again, I originally wrote this for A-level, but you could do a version of it for international GCSE as well. So when you're studying any novel, so be it all, if it's on paper one or if it's a coursework novel, it just gives you different sections which highlight for students what they can be looking for. So if they're doing the independent pre-reading, for example, then they can make notes on the different areas. And it also, of course, gives them a kind of sort of key vocabulary for how to write about different things. So in terms of narration, is it first, second or third person narrator? Is it an omniscient narrator? Or narrative structure? Is it a fragmented narrative? Is there foreshadowing? So it gives them a kind of a starting point on what to look for, which can be useful when they're doing their independent work on coursework. And then I just flagged a couple of resources that we published a year or so ago to help students write about drama as drama, because quite often students start writing about a play and suddenly it sounds like they're writing about a novel and there isn't much awareness of the different expectations for drama. So we wrote a couple of support resources for you. So as some of you might be doing a play for both assignment A and B, it's maybe worth having a look at those. And so now I'm back to the practicalities again. How do I prevent students from handing in first drafts that aren't great or are too long? So it's worth keep reminding students that you're only going to look at one draft, which is the norm and which we recommend. So it's really a waste of time, in a sense, if they hand in a first draft which is far away from being finished. Because they're not then getting the benefit of the feedback that you can offer them once. They're only going to get your view once. So if they haven't really finished, then it's a wasted opportunity. So you want to aim to that the first hand in is as good as possible, and you also want to check the length, as I mentioned before. So what I do tend to recommend is that you use something like this, a coursework checklist. It looks very pedantic, but it kind of, if you imagine what you're not allowed to do is go through their whole first draft and correct every error. That's not permitted. So this aims to kind of highlight to them what the typical problems are, which they can identify for themselves and correct before they hand that draft into you. So a couple of weeks before first hand in, you say to students, if you're working with computers in class, fine, they look at it there, but if they need a printout, bring a printout. Let's sit down and let's see how many of these things we can tick off as, yes, I have done it. So it goes through all the different things that you might want them to think about, how they embed quotes, how they build points, whether they've used the spell and grammar checker to get the accuracy as good as it can be. And then towards the end, it's things like, I have at least 5 passages of analysis of language and structure linked to the title in my coursework. And these kind of things can be done with highlighting. So, right, where do I have some more extensive analysis of language and structure? Let me take my yellow highlighter and find them. Oh dear, I can only find one. That means I haven't done enough. And if it's for assignment B on the context, I mention context at least 4 times and it's linked to my title. Again, now I'll take my pink highlighter. Where can I find that I've mentioned context? If it was only in one place and it was a big chunk, oh dear, that's a bolt-on. It shouldn't be like that. It should be spread through the essay. So this is just a way of trying to help students to make the most of that first set of feedback. And obviously, if you've got a length issue, you'll identify it then as well, and maybe they can correct it before they do hand that first draft in. Right, I'm not quite happy with my order there, so I'm just going to bring up another document before we carry on. Oh, no, sorry, I'm not actually. Apologies. So first of all, I just want to talk about feedback now, because this is a very common question. When I take my first drafts in and I mark them, what am I allowed to tell the student afterwards? What form is my feedback allowed to take? Can I write things, or does it have to be oral? The guidance on this is all in the JCQ instructions, and these, as you'll see as we go through, this is a very bland statement that doesn't feel awfully helpful when you're actually doing it. But this is a list of what you're allowed to give feedback on, which is not particularly relevant for this context. And then it carries on and it says centres must not provide model answers or writing frames specific to the task. What advice and feedback can I give during the task taking stage, which first draft is still task taking? Review candidates' work and provide oral and written advice at a general level. Having provided advice at a general level, allow candidates to revise and redraft work. There's no requirement to record details of general advice. So that is what you're allowed to do. And what you are not allowed to do, or if you do, you have to write it on the authentication sheet and the student can't be credited for that part of the work, is provide detailed specific advice on how to improve drafts to meet the assessment criteria, give detailed feedback on errors and omissions, intervene personally to improve the presentation or content of the work. So it's important to bear that in mind. So it doesn't make any difference if the feedback's oral or written, it has to remain at a general level. So in order to kind of help you with this, because you probably feel that that doesn't help students enormously, I've just got an example here of a sort of, again, an approach that you could use. So when the students come with their final drafts, before they give it to you, you take some class time and you give them this document, or you could give it to them to do at home equally, and you get them to fill this out in this column. So you've got the different AOs. Again, I've done this for assignment A and B. So the student needs to make a judgment. Where am I looking at the mark scheme, level 1 to 5 for each of the AOs? What would I need to do to move higher? If they've got anything that they're particularly struggling with, they can note it down. They say what level do they think that they've reached for the coursework. So they're doing the work themselves. You're not doing it. You're not highlighting the errors. And then in the teacher comments phase, you can feedback on what they've said. And I just give some examples here of what you might say. For example, you might say most of your points are drawn from Act 1. So in any text in the coursework, they'll be looking to show that they've studied the whole text and they understand all of the text. So if they had only, if all of their examples were about Act 1, that wouldn't be good, and it's something that would need to be flagged. So this is an example of what you might say depending on what they say. Basically, you're saying, I agree with what you've said, or I don't agree. And that's a way to kind of not break the rules, but to give a little bit more than a very general sort of bit of feedback to students. So you go through that process, you mark their work, you give it back. You don't give marks for drafts, but after they have submitted to you and you've marked it and moderated it internally, then that you do have to inform them of the mark that you've awarded before you submit it to us, and that's to allow for an internal review process should you need it, because after they've submitted it, the review processes are for whole cohorts, so an individual student can't have their individual coursework mark reviewed. Therefore, you must give them the opportunity to challenge it if necessary before you submit it to us. In the live event, I'm going to do some teacher networking at this point, and I'm now moving on to just practicalities. So I've taken you through the what happens, setting the coursework up, things to think about to make it work as well as possible. And now we can assume that you have done all of that. And I'm just going to give you a few reminders on what you have to do by when. These all apply to this academic year, so they refer to the end of working up to the June 2025 exam series. So all of your entries for that series need to be made by March the 21st. And so you'll be marking and moderating students' coursework. You'll be completing an assessment record sheet for each student, which has an AI declaration. You'll be informing the students of the marks that they've achieved. And then by the 15th of May, you'll be uploading the students' marks to edXL Online, and you will be scanning and then uploading the sample that we choose on the Learner Work Transfer Portal, or the LWT. So for each student, you'll have the front sheet and their two pieces of coursework scanned as one PDF, and you'll be uploading that to the LWT. I will be offering a support session just for submission in the coming week. So if you want more detail on all of this, you can come then. But these are just a few reminders. If you know all this, then fine, turn off here. You need to add the highest and lowest scoring student if those are not already named in the sample. If you've got more than one candidate with the highest or lowest mark, we don't need all of them. We only need one. So one highest and one lowest. If you've got any candidates that are appearing on our list who have withdrawn from the qualification, or who are not submitting coursework, or who are submitting incomplete coursework, you need to add additional folders using the Manage Learners button. So you would add an additional learner working at the same level as the person who's been withdrawn, and you would add a note to the admin and materials section to say, I'm adding the folder for X because candidate Y has been withdrawn. And your moderators are very grateful if when you finish all your mark upload on edXL Online, at the end you get the option to print off everything that you've entered. So then you have a list of your candidates and the marks entered, which is useful for you, so you can check that you haven't made any mistakes. And your moderators also like to have that list because it allows them to see your rank order and how you've put different candidates in relation to each other. So you can also upload that to the administrative material section of the LWT. So these are just some key dates and documents. So the edXL Online and the LWT are open for business around the middle of April. So you're carrying on with all your processes, and then you're just storing your coursework marks and samples ready for mid-April, when you can start to upload them. And I've got a couple of guidance documents, including avoiding common submission issues. So there are things that tend to go wrong with submissions. Things like I've mentioned, the coursework doesn't have the full title on it. the authentication sheet for each student doesn't have the mark breakdown on it. There are no summative comments, or there's no evidence of moderation. Those are typical things which will get into your individual moderator's report. So you can have a look at that document if you'd like some support with those. And now just some different examples. I'm quite often asked, well, what does moderation look like? So what should my scripts look like when I upload them to you? So I'll just say this briefly. Again, it's rather a detailed slide, but usually you'll have teacher one who marks their own students' work. They will do some marginal annotation and have a summative comment at the end. The marginal annotation says how you view the performance of the student in relation to the different AOs, so where you're seeing evidence of performance at a particular level. What's not appreciated is ticking all the way through the work. It obviously makes it more difficult for the moderator to read. The ticks can obscure, and a tick doesn't really say anything, especially not if the ticks are everywhere. Equally, not really useful is just writing the AO down the side, like AO1, AO2, AO4, because it doesn't say why you've awarded at a particular level for that AO. So you do the first annotation, the first mark, first annotation, and then at some point you'll be having a moderation activity in your department, and someone else will read the script, and then they will add their comments. They can use a different pen color, or some schools reserve the left-hand margin for first marker and the right-hand margin for second marker. The second marker will be saying whether they agree or not with the evaluation of the first marker, and they may also at the end make a comment in relation to the summative comment that the first marker has made, i.e. I agree with this evaluation in general, although I think it's a little bit too generous for AO1, therefore I would mark it at 20 rather than 21, for example. Another issue can be getting consistency across folders. So there are different patterns of moderation. I've done two patterns. One is every single folder is double marked. It's obviously very time consuming, but every piece of work is seen by at least two people. Other people might do paired marking exercises. So I sit with John. I look at his top, middle and bottom, and he looks at my top, middle and bottom, and then we compare whether a top with me is similar to a top with him, or do we need to go back and adjust? Like, have I been not generous enough? Do I need to up all of my marks slightly? And a good practice for everyone is when all of that first and second marking is finished, that the head of department does a rank order. So they put all the folders in mark order, and then they read the folders that are next to each other, and they think, now, does this seem to be the same standard as that, or is it in fact better? And then realigning the marking a little bit like that. If you have any students who have partially completed the coursework, you only score a 0 if no work has been submitted that meets any of the assessment criteria, and you mark an X if no coursework is submitted at all because the candidate is effectively absent. If you've got incomplete work, then there may be the possibility of getting a short extension. So if you've had a student who's been ill a lot and we're sort of into April and it's looking difficult for them to finish by the 15th of May, you can contact us and ask for a short extension. And otherwise, if you get work submitted that's incomplete for no particular reason, then you just mark what you've got and you just award the marks, and then the student is just getting access to the marks that are available for the part of the work that they've done. That's really leaving coursework behind now, and I've just got a couple of slides at the end which just remind you about things for this academic year. We've got no changes for English Language A because we already changed to the new coursework in June 2024. No changes for English Language B. For 4ET1, so that's what we're talking about today. We have an issue 3 specification flagging the 2 new texts that we added for paper 1, which are for first assessment in 2026, and also flagging an expanded choice of set text editions for paper 1 and paper 2. That was to allow you a bit more flexibility. We've got no changes on our modular specifications, except again for the modular version of 4ET1, the addition of the new set texts. On-screen assessment is available for all of these qualifications, and modular assessment routes are available for international centres for XEA1 and for XET1. And we did the first certification. Oh no, sorry, first certification in May, June 2025 coming up. Yeah, before the beginning of this academic year, we flagged the addition of the 2 new texts for paper 1, and just to confirm that we've uploaded all the support materials that we promised. So sample assessment materials, specimen papers, so you've got 2 sets of questions on the new texts, updated getting started guide, knowledge organisers and key links to support your teaching. Just a reminder of the resit rules in case that affects you, probably not so much in the summer, but maybe in November, just in relation to coursework now. So if a student, for example, they sit in the summer and they're not pleased with their result and they want to resit in November 25, they can carry their coursework marks forward. There aren't any limits to the number of times that they can carry the coursework marks forward, but you need to make the correct entry code. Students can't rework coursework that has already been submitted. So they can't, for example, I don't know, submit coursework on, let's say, Macbeth and an inspector calls, they score only, I don't know, 20 marks across both, and they think, I'd like to take that coursework and just do it better and then resubmit it in another series. That's not possible. You have to have a new title, although you can still work with the same texts. And it's not possible to half carry forward, like carry forward assignment A and not redo assignment B. It's all or nothing. So either you carry the marks forward for both or you do new work for both. And the changes that we made to the English Language A coursework don't impact carry forward rules because the marks are the same. There are no limits to the number of times coursework marks can be carried forward unless the specification changes and the number of marks changed, for example. I think I've covered all those dates, so I'm not going to repeat. Just a reminder about some of the resources. So we do have summaries of all of the questions ever set right up until the November 2024 series. So you can look those up and go through series by series which question was set for each text. There's just guidance there on ordering anthologies and purchasing set texts for this qualification for 4ET1. Reminders about the anthology, and we would be through to any questions. So only now for me to say thanks for listening. I hope it was useful and I look forward to seeing you another time. Thanks very much.